12. Notes from the Underground. Time stopped inside Ace's skull. There was the taste, the stench, the warmth of mud against her face, frozen in a single moment. Her pain froze. Sandra's weight on her back froze. Both seemed cold, almost abstract. Ace lay half buried in the conservatory, wondering only why she wasn't dead. Hands seized her shoulders roughly, pulling her upwards again. She shook weakly, a hopeless effort to free herself. There didn't seem any point in fighting. Her body was riddled with weariness, aching with the sheer effort she had gone through that day. She hated her weakness. Not much point, she'd be dead in a few moments. So close to the final end, she found herself harbouring a much more resigned attitude to life. She turned her head, staring hopelessly into the face of death. Jane Page smiled back at her. "Oh, you are still with it then?" Page grinned, face like a scored potato. "I was beginning to think I was the only one left." Energy kicked back into Ace's body. She pulled away from Page. "Where's Sandra?" she asked coolly, trying not to match the assassin's stare. Page indicated a slumped shape lying in a damaged patch of fronds. "Vicious little harpy, isn't she?" Page said. "You've not thanked me." "Is she dead?" Ace growled. "No." Page shook her head with dismissive sincerity. "I was tempted." "Thanks." It took an effort, but Ace managed to say it. Page nodded, her features losing their sour sense of humour and becoming grim cold. She pulled something from the folds of her coat and pitched it in Ace's direction. Ace caught it in her cupped palms. It was metal, familiar. It was a pistol, an unfamiliar design. Ace guessed that it was an automatic repeater, backed up by more than a fair force and capacity, loaded with explosive bullets. Big league for a small firearm. A very heavy, very comfortable piece of weaponry. High kill power. Very nice. In the right hands. "This," she said flatly, "does a lot of damage." "I like damage." Page's voice was coarse. "It's an art form." Ace stepped forward and pressed the gun under Page's chin, forcing the woman's head upwards. Page made no attempt to move. Her face and eyes seemed to bloat, not with fear, but with arrogance. "That was a mistake," Ace said. "Possibly." Page's voice was loose and easy, still seeming to sneer at her. "You know how to use one of those, which end goes bang. That's obvious. I've seen more action than you ever have." "Killed anyone?" Page was almost casual about it. There was a coolness in her manner which Ace found admirable, and callous. "One or two." "I believe you," Page said, her voice growing slightly more emotive. "We're very similar, you and I. What I can see in your eyes—" "Shut up!" Ace spat. "I only kill people who deserve it. I can name one now." "Only one?" "I can name two." Ace studied Page's face with new intensity. She kept the gun cradled in her hands, but no longer quite ready to kill. "You're bloody good," Page smiled, fixing Ace with a sharp stare, her voice becoming slow. "I've changed my plan about Winterdawn. I'll catch some stick from 10, but all I want to do is get out of this house with body and soul intact. Before I go, I have to kill Gabriel and Tanith." Ace said nothing. "I can do it," Page insisted. "Go in with guns blazing, and don't stop until they're scattered across the floor in bits. I can go alone, or I could have help." "Me?" Ace asked, shrugging casually. "So quick," Page sighed. "Everyone else is dead or mad. I'd lay odds those two are responsible. You've got the gun, the ability, the inclination, and the desire to use it. Up to you." Ace stared at Page, then at the jagged shape in her hand, then back to Page. Her face was bland. Ace levelled the gun at it, wondering whether it would be worth it. "I don't like you," she said. "Remember that." She lowered the gun and watched Paige nod. She felt as though she'd sold her soul. A Pentecost was babbling on the inside of Cranley's head. 1,000 languages rattled from 1,000 tongues across the landscape of his mind. They screamed their rage, anger, and lonely emptiness, the hollowness left by the absolute destruction they had known. Worlds buried in meaningless holocausts. These were the voices of the survivors, screaming for justice or explanations. Cranley might have sympathized, but Cranley was gone, buried deeper in his psyche than even the insubstantial Legion could reach. They called to a husk Cranley, stripped of mind. The Pentecost called to him, drawing him to its heart. Cranley's hollow body stumbled through twisted corridors to the nursery. The husk stared with vacant eyes at its surroundings. The toys, the furniture, the chest of drawers, the body sprawled on the carpet. These were meaningless things on the edge of its perception. But there was something else, something that fascinated even the void Cranley had become, something that stimulated the last fragment of his mind. A black window glowing with darkness. Cranley saw no reflection in its jet surface. Unquestioning, Cranley leapt towards the window, driving his fist towards the glass. Contact came, brief and violent. The sound of shattering glass reverberated along empty passages. Sandra woke to the smell of mud and blood. The mud was on her face and hands and clothes, hardening into thick cakes. The blood was dry in her nostrils, on her teeth, and flecked on her hands, black crusts gathered under her fingernails. Both the sight and her memory were clear and sharp. Wedderburn's body was a withered thing on the far side of the room. It seemed too fragile ever to have been human. Shaking, Sandra climbed to her feet. What she had done seemed so unreal. She stared at her hands and remembered her bloodlust. She recalled the swiftness, the pleasure, the taste of the kill. Her body was dirty, covered in the stench of her actions. Her skin writhed. She began to scratch, finding she couldn't stop. She needed to purge herself of the scent of the kill. The world tottered as she moved. This was real, and this was now. She slumped against the door, barely reacting to the diffuse pain that shocked through her arm. She cupped her hands over her face and began to scream into the soiled darkness of her palms. The gun was a weight in Ace's fist. The sweat building on her palms hadn't made the weapon easier to hold. She didn't feel happy going coldly without passion to kill. She thought she'd feel safer with a gun. Instead, she felt inadequate. This wouldn't be a kill in the heat of battle. It would be her, alone with the gun, facing an unarmed enemy. The advantage was hers. She held all the aces. It didn't feel right. She steeled herself, working up the nerve to squeeze the trigger, working up a righteous hatred for her target. Not too difficult. She just thought of Benny. The rest was easy. She stared at Paige. The assassin was in her element now, deriving deep satisfaction from the moment. She would have no compunctions about slaughtering Gabriel and Tanith if Ace's nerve gave out. This was her show. She was making it work her way. Tracking the targets hadn't proved difficult. Paige guessed that they would have marked off some space in the house as their own, and Ace saw no fault in that reasoning. Despite, perhaps because of the miscegenation of floors and passageways and rooms, they stumbled across Gabriel and Tanith's hiding way in minutes. The couple's voices caught in a passageway, echoing from another room. They were together in that single room, a bedroom, Winterdawn's shrine to his wife. Through the gap in the door, Ace saw them moving, talking, kissing. She watched their activity with cold and hateful eyes. Benny was in the room with them, stretched on the bed. Gabriel and Tanith must have brought her there, and the thought that they must have touched her to move her uncovered within Ace a deeper revulsion than she had felt before. She glanced at Paige, catching a glimpse of quiet confirmation in her colleague's eyes. Ace kicked the door wide open and tumbled into the room, into the midst of the enemy. The blood that surged through her body, the hatred she felt for this couple, wiped away her guilt, fears, and compunctions about killing in cold blood. So they were unarmed. It was better that way. There was a perverse pleasure to it. She raised the pistol and pumped a bullet into Gabriel's chest. His shirt gained a scarlet flower stain, and he staggered backwards under the impact. Not quite dead, Gabriel released a low, jarring howl. Agony made sound. Ace ground her teeth into her lower lip and fired again. Each new shot knocked Gabriel further backwards in a perverse, jerking walk. He smashed into the wall. His lifeless shell of a body sunk to its knees, leaving long smears on the wallpaper behind him. Tanith stepped forward. Ace spun round, training the pistol on her. Too late. Paige was already by her side, arms swinging upwards in a perfect arc. The graceful motion of her limbs was accompanied by the monotonous music of the machine gun. Tanith's body gained a clean line of red holes from thigh to neck. Pink stains blossomed across her suit. Paige let her gun fall. She grinned toothily. "Lovely jubbly," she announced. Ace dropped her pistol. It hit the thick carpet with a near-silent thud. "This," Tanith patted her chest, "burns. We're grateful." A line of blood slipped from her lips down her chin. Ace stared. Jane Paige loomed behind Tanith's shoulder. Ace registered the cocktail of confusion and determination picked out on Paige's face. The assassin swung her arms, gun aimed at the back of Tanith's head. The gun fired silently. Tanith's forehead exploded. Ace looked down, thoughtfully studying the butterfly patterns of blood that stained her combat jacket, and she felt nothing. Tanith's lips assumed a rictus smile. Her teeth were ivory pillars flecked red. "Jane," she said slowly, mocking and deliberate, "are you selling your soul to a cold gun?" Ace watched Paige lower her gun, watched the incomprehension grow on her face, watched it blossom into rejection. She was shaking her head wildly, sharp eyes full of good-humoured madness. Ace watched and still felt nothing, as if this was an ancient piece of film, silent and unnatural. Paige didn't seem real, Tanith didn't seem real, Ace didn't seem real. The reel spun, clicking through the projector. On the screen, Gabriel appeared behind Paige and wrested the gun from her. Gabriel's body was a patchwork of bullet holes, so that it seemed in danger of falling apart. Paige's guns were designed to damage. They didn't do things by halves. "Unimaginative." Gabriel was shaking his head ruefully. "We had hoped for something more original." He broke into a hearty laugh. He didn't seem real either. Ace felt herself begin to shake. Tanith swung her head to one side, letting it loll like something dead. Her eyes and mouth were alive with insanity. Slowly, aware that she had Ace's total attention, she dug her fingers into the wounds, twisting her hand to work it further into her body. She clenched her fist, her face wrenching into a contorted portrait of agony, hissing pain through gritted teeth. Ace tried to draw back, but Tanith's other arm leapt to grip her shoulder. Tanith threw her head up, breaking into a scream of pain that endured for minutes, changing in neither pitch nor intensity. Ace kept her eyelids tight together for the duration of the screech, grateful she couldn't see her own expression, grateful that there was so little left in her stomach. "The beauty of pain," Gabriel was saying, his voice clear and concise above the scream. "The ugliness of pain. Both lend us something unique. As the bullets cut us, we were born anew, embodied in the experience. The screech stopped. Ace opened her eyes. Gabriel and Tanith stood before her, their bodies clean and repaired. Even their clothes were unbroken and unstained. The couple shared a smile, sweet, condescending curves quivering on their lips. Paige lay slumped by one wall, shaking her head on the verge of tears. Beyond Paige was the bed, and on the bed lay the body of Benny Summerfield. Ace felt the room grow arctic cold. "What are you?" "In the Dark Ages," Gabriel said, as if he was a schoolteacher delivering a particularly dull lesson, "Christians believed the suffering of the world was caused by the presence of Satan's evil in God's creation." Ace's eyes flicked from Gabriel to Tanith and back again. "And what's this got to do with you?" she asked. "We are the suffering." Ace opened her mouth to speak, but was silenced by a gesture. "Not in any religious sense," Tanith said hastily, lowering her hand. "We aren't responsible for all the ills of the universe. Not yet. The cosmos is in agony. Its structure has been maimed. We are the damage on this level of existence. We are the scream. We are the cosmos, replicated in microcosm. We draw our power from the structure of reality, aligned to all things, all spaces. We can do anything. We know everything. We are inextricably linked to the nature of now. Does that answer your question?" Ace nodded, trying to appear knowledgeable, tough and grim. She wasn't fooling anyone, least of all herself. "You're bloody mad," Paige snapped. Ace's eyes leapt across the room to the manically grinning face, the constantly shaking head. Ace could see that she hadn't believed. She hadn't seen their sincerity. "There is no such thing as the cosmos," Paige declared. There was sincerity in her eyes too, but also something dangerous. There are individual humans and loyalties. There is nothing larger than human action. She nodded, as if the act of nodding automatically confirmed the truth of her words. It confirmed only her instability. Gabriel and Tanith were exchanging glances thick with humour. "Nothing bigger than human action." He sounded unusually reasonable. "Nothing," Paige confirmed. "Actions have consequences." "He that kills a breeding sow," Tanith chimed in, "destroys all her offspring to the 1000th generation." "Bugger the consequences!" Paige straightened up, shaking too freely to cut an impressive figure. "They get in the way of freedom." "Freedom?" Tanith was humorless. "Of course." "Don't you think your actions might have an effect? That you might influence the future?" Gabriel asked. "The future sorts itself out," Paige asserted. "Of course, but think. Every time you act, you negate all the potential futures in which you didn't." "Blink, and you erase a future in which you didn't," Tanith suggested. "Of course, bigger actions have bigger consequences, more futures erased, more potential lives burned away in a moment's thoughtlessness." "But there's chaos theory. The departed Professor Winterdawn was working on a holistic model of the universe. Every action affects everything else." "Blink," said Tanith, "and you kill millions who might have lived." "Crap," Ace spat, barging back into the conversation. "Okay, what we do affects the future. You can't avoid that. Doing nothing would have the same effect. You can't tell. You take the plunge and hope things work out." "You're right," Gabriel spun round. "That's wonderful, wonderful common sense. Now, tell me, what happens if you're a time traveller and you wander into a time or place where by rights you should never have been? What effect do you think you'd have?" "Time travel?" Paige leered. "You almost had me going for a moment." Ace opened her mouth to say something, but found nothing there. "Oh, please shut your mouth," Tanith said disapprovingly. "You look like a dead fish. and you're dribbling on your jacket. Just think, everything you've done or haven't done since you appeared on Svartos, the smallest actions irrevocably altering futures of 100 worlds on which you had no right to be. Millions of potential real futures dislocated. You, every other time traveller, guilty of genocide to an unimaginable degree. How'd you like them apples? Tanith placed a friendly hand on Ace's shoulder and adopted a sad, wide-eyed expression. Then, with exaggerated slowness, she winked. Ace stared back at her, old feelings of revulsion returning to her. That face was so close to her, so disgusting in its proximity. "Those things in the nursery," she began, tentatively. "I thought they might be dead things. They're not, are they?" "The dead have no reason to hate the living." Gabriel clapped his hands in an extravagant mockery of delight. "Besides, lurching zombies are passé. They aren't the undead, they're the unborn." Ace nodded, trying to turn away, but Gabriel's stare had her fixed. "They may have been erased from destiny, but the possibility of them is still imprinted into the structure of the universe. We can sense them dimly. Perhaps we even have a vague affinity with them." "Careful," Tanith checked him. "She'll think you're fond of something." Ace scowled. "We can draw them from the structure. With our power we can remake them. The TARDIS came in handy. We set its computers to do all the legwork, while we got on with something more interesting. Not only does it have the power required to calculate all the probabilities, but it also kept the system tied up, so you never got a chance to leave." "You brought the TARDIS here?" Ace blurted the question hurriedly, remembering the mystery that had seemed so important the previous evening. Gabriel shook his head. "As far as we can tell, that was an enormous coincidence." "These things," Ace asked, "why are they coming out of that window?" Tanith laughed, pushing her face closer. "For effect," she announced. "Why else?" "Yeah," Ace nodded, feeling shaky. "Look, there's this insect." "One of them," Tanith admitted. "A dominant evolutionary life form on Earth in one potential. You seemed bored searching those rooms, not finding anything remotely interesting. We introduced it to liven things up for you." "Thanks," Ace muttered softly, half closing her eyes and mulling over what Tanith had told her. Something had softened her sense of aggression and anger. She had a great deal to think about. "I'll tell you what I think," Paige's voice cut through the careful silence of the bedroom. She slunk deliberately across the room, her body bursting with a desire for confrontation. Gabriel and Tanith wheeled round slowly to match her stare. "You know what I think?" Paige snapped. "Very little," Gabriel suggested. Paige let it pass. "I think you are talking meaningless metaphysical shit. I don't know whether you're mad enough to believe it yourselves. I don't know how you got Ace to believe you. All you are is psychotic. You're as human as I am. You shot us at point-blank range, yet we live. You may have noticed. Tricks, drugs, something hypnotic. There's nothing more. I know the truth." "Ace?" she appealed to her former ally. Ace shook her head, expecting to despise herself. But for that moment, and no longer, she felt good. She knew that she had more in common with Gabriel and Tanith than she ever would with the wretched, hateful woman she had been forced to ally herself to. "Remember, Paige," she snapped, "I don't like you." Gabriel broke away from his partner, sweeping towards the angry figure. "You know the truth." His voice rang with terrible sincerity. "Know this. Your world doesn't exist. You don't exist. You're another lost soul, a phantom from a potential reality, destroyed by some clumsy time traveller. We pulled you into existence because we needed a wild card, and you, because you wanted to make trouble for Winterdawn, were the perfect choice." Paige stopped in her tracks, glaring at the oncoming figure. Crap! A figment of your imagination. You are a figment of our imagination. No! You don't exist in this world. You know it's the truth. No, I mean... Yes! Gabriel snarled triumphantly. No! Paige mouthed, a hollow denial. She sank to her knees, fierce but hopeless anger blazing from her eyes. For a minute, Ace thought that she was going to break down and cry. She didn't, too proud. Gabriel floated closer, and as he moved, his body unfolded like a cloak billowing in a gale. The folds of his body swept around her, enveloping her, swallowing her. Ace saw a final despairing scream play soundlessly on Paige's mouth before she was engulfed. Then she was gone. They were both gone. Ace was alone with Tanith and the oblivious husk of Bernice. Ace was weary. She let her body sink under its own weight. Everything that had happened in the house had led her here, now, to this moment, the big confrontation. And it was an anticlimax. She felt impotent, unable to do anything but watch and understand. Ace, the doctor's voice echoed. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your form long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you, except the will which says to them, hold on, then you're the Ace I remember. Yeah, thanks a bloody bunch, Doctor, she muttered. She had a deal to make. Look, Mum, I've sold my soul twice, in one day. Is Benny dead? She asked, forcing herself despite the weariness she felt, knowing what she wanted to say, what she was going to say. Her soul has been wrenched from her body, Tanith shrugged. Is there any possibility? Ace proceeded slowly through the sentence, making certain she used the most meaningful words possible. Any potential hope that she could still be alive? I know what you're saying, Tanith smiled, not unkindly. I can't do that. There are only a few thousand potentials open to us. The chances of one of them being a Bernice Summerfield is remote, to say the least. Besides, it wouldn't be your Benny. The woman you've known is gone. Ace nodded, raising a hand to her face to mask her disappointment. Slowly, almost grudgingly, she began to cry. If it's any consolation, we didn't want her to die. Does it matter? She's dead. She'll fade in your mind. You won't forget her, but the pain will die. I'm sorry, but that sounds bloody stupid. Tanith placed a palm against Ace's cheek. Ace pulled her head back to stare long and soft into her eyes. Think of it this way. Tanith's voice was high and sweet. You've got me now. Ace's eyes narrowed as she broke into a weary nod. I've got you now, Ace agreed, dreamily whispering the electric phrase. Her hands leapt to lock round Tanith's neck, eyes still alive with blood and fire. I've got you now, you bitch, she snarled, and tightened her grip. Ace knew the pressure it took to kill quickly, the pressure it took to be certain of a killing, the pressure it took to snap a neck. All three became one pressure in her hands. She applied it, teeth gritted into a perverse grin. Tanith's face burst open into a thick and hateful smile. Her eyes were black and burning. Ace's hatred was a furious storm, blind to everything, but she realized that the woman didn't even seem uncomfortable. You give me myself, Tanith hissed, forcing the words through lack of breath. She broke into a stunted giggle. Ace looked into Tanith's eyes and saw herself reflected there, a vicious animal, face contorted with hatred. She saw her own eyes, near sockets, wet and dark. She saw Gabriel's hands locked round Benny's throat at breakfast. She saw doubt. She relaxed, releasing the throttling grip. She could see the bruises she had made on Tanith's neck, and discovered that she had lost the desire to tighten her grip. "Can you imagine?" Tanith's black eyes shone, 100 points of light reflected in their facets. "Can you imagine what it is like to be dropped in at the deep end of existence, with intimate knowledge of everything, yet not being a part of it?" Ace shook her head grimly. "Gabriel and I have no meaning. We are utterly pointless people. We are the notes from the underground, chords, maybe whole tunes, cognizant of every culture, of every identity, yet having none of our own. You, little person, you're a programmed instrument, determined by influences around you." Ace shook her head again. "I'm not determined by anybody." "Oh yes, good little rebel. Even a reaction against a system is a product of that system. You're just so wrapped up in your own culture you don't realize it. Deep down, you're the biggest conformist of them all." "So what are you then?" Ace sneered. "We had no influences, no culture. We were born cold into reality. Christ, it's difficult working on the level of one culture, addressing people as narrow and as limited as you. How can you possibly envisage the pain of using one rigid language, one grammar, one syntax, just to get by? We have to make an identity for ourselves. Anything goes. Squeeze harder. It's good for me. I'm Tanith. Tanith the victim. Tanith the tortured. Don't care. Doesn't really matter. Any way the wind blows. That's all, folks." "You're sick." "I am, aren't I? But delicious with it. Squeeze." Ace shoved her away. She turned her back on her in disgust. "What are you now?" she yelled, "apart from insecure?" "I'll be anything you want," Tanith whispered, her voice a reedy exercise at Ace's back. "I have to. Play games with me, my love. Anything will do. Tortured or torturer." A spasm of pain leapt up Ace's spine. She arched backwards, mouth twisting half into a gasp, half into a silent scream. She tried to claw at the source of the pain, deep in her agonized curved back, but her arms remained paralyzed, locked at her side. "Sadist!" Tanith's voice rang clearly behind her. Ace sank to her knees, a needle-sharp pain puncturing her skull and driving slowly into her brain. "Dealer of pain," Tanith declaimed. Ace fell flat onto the floor and began to writhe. The pain was everywhere, encompassing all things, shrieking hideously through her body. She tried to howl, to cry out, but she couldn't bear to move her tongue. Tanith's boot nudged her face gently. "See what I have found, my darling?" The voice was high and distant, and filled Ace with disgust. It wasn't an emotion strong enough to fight back the pain. "Can you hear the sea?" The grey man came to a standstill. He smiled, bowing slightly, removing his hat. The doctor noted that there was a dark streak in his white hair. When he spoke, his voice was smooth and pleasant, and as ageless as his face. "Hello, Professor Winterdawn, Theta Sigma. I had hoped this meeting need not take place, but nonetheless I am honoured to meet you. Theta Sigma." The doctor considered the grey man with colder eyes than before. Theta Sigma was a secret he kept well guarded. It was not his name, but it identified him uniquely among the Time Lords. It should not have been spoken outside the Academy of Gallifrey, and the doctor was certain that whatever the grey man might be, he was not a Time Lord. "You know more," he said, the coldness in his voice matching that in his heart's, "than you should." "I have followed your movements for some time. I have noted your vendetta against the Dalek Empire with considerable distaste." The doctor frowned, leaping instantly to his own defence. "The Daleks must be fought. They have no conception of morality." "Indeed." The grey man clicked his tongue. At times the contest seems to be one to find which of you can display the least possible morality. The doctor's next sentence was snapped and terse. The Daleks are irredeemably evil. Nothing is irredeemably evil. The grey man was shaking his head slowly. Especially not the Daleks. You should know. You've seen it. There must be justice, the doctor insisted, and a vengeance. Nemesis? The grey man asked suggestively. Yes, nemesis, the doctor agreed. Or guilt, the grey man suggested darkly. The doctor seized up. He had to argue with the grey man. He knew that. He had to justify himself. But when he tried, he found there was nothing there. No justifications, not even explanations. He turned away, trying to hide his face. I'm sorry. His accuser seemed upset by the effect of his barb. My remark was designed to wound. I can only apologize. The doctor acknowledged the apology with a grim nod, but he still felt bitter and afraid, and small. He wasn't fooled by physical shapes. The grey man was larger and more terrible than he had imagined. I'm sorry, Winterdawn said. All that went over my head. We were discussing things of minor importance. You said something about empires. Winterdawn's eyebrows arched. Things of minor importance, the grey man stressed. There are weightier matters to be considered. I am here against my better judgment. Normally I do not interfere. I try to encourage local solutions. Winterdawn smiled, a smile full of patience and lacking in humour. The problem is partly of my own creation, but mostly, Professor Winterdawn, the responsibility is yours. Mine? Winterdawn was genuinely startled by the remark. Your interference has unleashed a wave of destruction on the universe. I fear your actions have been negligent. The grey man seemed to sense the confusion and fear growing on Winterdawn's face, and changed tack. No, I'm not here to censure you. No matter what else I may have become, my conscience is still my own. You acted in ignorance. No blame can be laid with you. The man in grey paused, and Winterdawn took advantage of the situation to unleash a bellow mixing outrage, fear, confusion, and anger. Blame for what? The grey man spoke again, softer and slower. Your experiments with the metahedron. You do not understand the functions of the engine. Your manipulation resulted directly in the physical effects you desired, but there were other effects. The metahedron is a device for manipulating the structure of reality. When you used it, parts of the fabric of reality were affected. Affected? The doctor asked, recognizing a euphemism when he heard one. Distorted. The grey man stumbled through his words. Mutated. In some areas totally destroyed. Much of it was of a trivial nature and was repaired by the natural functions of the cosmos. Other parts are beyond repair. I have no idea what the consequence of that will be. It will be many millenniums before their effects will be seen, and then... He paused again. The doctor saw that he was shaking. On the physical plane, this damage has manifested itself as sentience. Wholly negative, destructive sentience. These sentiences have already, killed or maimed a couple of people. A note of hysteria had crept into his previously calm voice. I heard a child die. Winterdawn, they are loose in your house. The silence that followed was brief. You knew, Winterdawn howled. You knew, and you didn't do anything. There's a bunch of bloody psychos in my house, and you're content to stand around and witter on about local bloody solutions, you bastard. If my daughter's hurt, Christ knows I'll haunt you. The doctor stepped forward, trying to calm the screaming figure in the wheelchair. It seemed to work. The tirade ended. Winterdawn fell silent. But his eyes glowed with suppressed anger. I did my best, the grey man said cautiously, his back to the pair of them. Local problems call for local solutions. There are local agents. Where were they, then? Winterdawn scowled. I didn't see them. The doctor blinked and understood. He faced the grey man. It was you, he said simply. I have no affection for the Time Lords of Gallifrey, nor any Mayfly race that claims for itself the status of gods. But if flung into a chaotic situation, they are more than capable of stabilizing matters. The doctor had nothing to say. He knew the power it required to disrupt the smooth functioning of a TARDIS. I plucked a TARDIS from the time streams at random, the grey man confessed. I placed it in the house. I was certain a Time Lord would attend to matters without fuss. I underestimated the forces they would face. I continue to be surprised by the sheer magnitude of my stupidity. That's easy for you to say, the doctor said smoothly. I was surprised it turned out to be you, the grey man continued. You would have brought new thinking to the situation. They sidetracked you. The doctor nodded again, speaking with insistence. Yes, now I'm sidetracked, and my companions are trapped in the same house as these destructive forces. The doctor's voice snapped the grey man out of his lethargy. Yes, of course, he said eagerly. You must go back. There is still time. There is always still time. There is always still time, and there is always flowing time, the doctor replied, plucking the quote from memories of dusty books in the Academy library. I warn you, things will have changed in your absence, the man said. Are you still relying on local solutions? Winterdawn spat. I cannot join you if that's what you mean, the grey man said. I have a prior engagement. The damage done extends far beyond the physical plane. I must attend to that. Now, go. Darkness collapsed around them. Jane Page's cell was bare. It was somewhere in the heart of Winterdawn's home. Page didn't know exactly where, nor did she care. She knew that she was something less than human, but she cared less. This knowledge was useless, sitting uneasily on the edge of her consciousness, acknowledged only because she hadn't the nerve to challenge the idea. All Paige cared about was herself. It was all she had left. She dwelt on the here, on the now, on the grey expanse around her. She couldn't see it properly. Gabriel had stripped her of her gun, her coat, her freedom, and her glasses. Her eyes were weak without them. She was a prisoner. Harsh ropes chafed at her wrists and ankles, binding her securely to a harsh metal chair. There was the cold, a light draught that cut through her body to stab at her bones. New bones, she realized, no more than a day old. Dark colours blurred before her. Gabriel. They burn Dante where you come from, he said, casually terminating a long silence. Very apt. If you had read him, you might understand why you must undergo this ordeal. Dark blur held something towards her face, prodding it sharply into her cheeks. You will notice I have a number of instruments whose application will cause pain. To you, possibly. I doubt that you feel pain. Your nervous system isn't developed enough. You are without a doubt not human. You will notice that however much you may scream, I will ignore you. You might be real, you might not be, but in the interests of individual freedom, I would prefer to assume that you're not. After all, I don't want my own prejudice to become outweighed by the possibility that I might be committing some vague ethical offence against a human's rights. Still, who wants to live when you're having fun? I don't care. Why do I bother justifying myself? You're not human. You don't deserve an explanation. Let's begin. Praise be, Paige droned blandly. I haven't got all day. Something lodged itself into her throat, a huge, hard, solid shape with a metal taste and a mechanical curve. It stopped at the back of her throat. Paige swallowed coolly, trying not to gag, well aware of what the shape was. Between her teeth was the barrel of a gun, probably her own. Paige went numb as she understood the danger. It was there, Every time she breathed or swallowed, she became aware of the icy lump of death in her throat. "Come on, Pagey, let's have a song." Paige was silent, too scared to risk it. "Sing," Gabriel snapped. Silence, the taste of the gun and the fear of death. "Sing!" A hand smashed into the side of her face, matched by the force of Gabriel's yell. Taking the hint, she formed the words. "Land of hope and glory." The words were forced and unrecognizable, but they were coming. "Mother of the free." "That's enough," Gabriel insisted. "That's quite enough." The thing was withdrawn from her mouth. Paige relaxed a little. "Was it the singer or the song?" she asked. "A bit of both." "Tell me, have you ever tortured anyone?" "I have. It's cruel to be kind." "You're a butcher, Jane Page." "That's what they said, while they still had tongues." "Did you enjoy it?" "Yes," Paige lied without passion. "Sometimes. I prefer the gun, the target. Torture prolongs the effect, makes me uneasy." "How does it feel to be on the other end?" "Not good," Paige continued. "Empty, cold, perhaps lonely." "Soon we shall be together," Gabriel said, his blade tickling the underside of Paige's chin. "Any tips? This is my first time. I'm a torture virgin, I suppose." "Eyes are good. Nails and teeth if you have the equipment. Breasts if it's a woman. Start with psychological torture. It gets them in a better state," Paige mused. "On the whole, it's a matter of technique." She paused suspiciously. "Why am I telling you this?" "Because I want to hear, and I am very persuasive." "Psychological torture," Gabriel responded sympathetically. "Possibly. You think that if you're cooperative, then I might change my mind." Paige blinked, the longest blink she had ever known. It lasted for a fragment of a second. In that time, she felt Gabriel tug away the topmost buttons of her blouse, felt the knife point falling into the gap. "Welcome," Gabriel's voice sang loud and terrible in the darkness, "to the outmost circle of hell." Justin Cranley's body lay motionless on the floor of the nursery, a thing twisted and broken from a fall. Round his head was a halo of shattered glass. The window above him was punctured, a jagged hole punched into its surface. It was no longer black. The voices were gone. Tanith stood by the body, staring down and considering. Her mind was wrapped in chaos, a tumult of information absorbed into a structureless whole, stretching into a void of static and white noise. Confusion screamed deranged songs on the inside of her head, too many to be learned properly. After an hour's silent vigil, she was joined by Gabriel. "It's over," he said simply, smiling as he divulged the news. "Today the shadow fell, tomorrow the world," Tanith declared. The notes from underground broke into laughter, before kissing with all the pleasure and passion they could muster. "Love and death," Gabriel called. "Love and death," Tanith echoed. "Long may they reign." Suddenly, the real world came back into focus. There was stone floor beneath the doctor's feet, electric light flooding his eyes, a tetrahedron by his shoes. The shock of being confronted with something real was almost too much for him. He placed a hand on Winterdawn's chair to steady himself. He was in the cellar, the room from which he had left the universe years and seconds earlier. The doctor cast his eyes round the room cautiously. They fell on an object sitting abandoned in the corner, gathering dust. He picked it up, studying it sadly. It was a mask, dirty and cracked. 2 empty eyes stared up at him accusingly. A hollow grin sat poignantly on its brittle wooden lips. "Truman," the doctor whispered. He felt an uncomfortable feeling of loss and sorrow. The metal door of the cellar creaked suddenly. The doctor tensed. "Who's there?" he called cautiously, letting the mask fall, forgotten. A dark shape burst through the door. It darted across the room, a flurry of awkward movements flinging across the floor into the arms of Professor Winterdawn. The chair creaked ominously under the new weight. "Dad!" the shape screeched. "Thank God!" The voice seemed to draw Winterdawn completely back to reality. The old sharpness entered his bleary, confused eyes. "Sandra!" he exclaimed. "I thought—" He never completed the sentence. He didn't need to. "Dad, there are people here," Sandra said, gasping for air and words. "They got into the house. They killed Harry. They made me kill more." Sandra held up her hands so both Winterdawn and the doctor could see the layer of blood built on her fingers. "Gabriel and Tanith," Sandra said. The hate and the fear with which she invested the names were difficult to ignore. "They've made us do so many things," she whispered. "Sandra," the doctor asked slowly, "Ace and Bernice, are they—" "I don't know," Sandra turned. "I tried to kill Ace. They made me. It's okay, she got away. Oh, God!" Sandra's eyes burst with tears. She buried her head against Winterdawn's chest. The professor drew his daughter closer. A sour expression had grown on his face. "I must find them," the doctor said simply, hurrying from the room. On the far side of the door was a nightmare. The cellar passages were gone. In their place was a network of corridors from every floor of the house, woven together into a mockery of architecture. Tunnels swirled and shifted, forming new junctions, breaking older ones. The layout of the house spread out before him, labyrinthine and transient, a maze with liquid walls. The doctor considered the new architecture carefully, not trying to map it nor follow its writhing contour. He stepped into the heart of the storm. Closing his eyes, he ran, the only possible direction, forwards. He stopped eventually, opening his eyes. The house had reverted to an older, more formal structure. A staircase rose ahead of him, leading upwards towards an infinitely distant ceiling. The doctor felt a shudder of déjà vu, but paid it little attention. The stairs seemed solid enough. The doctor pounded upwards, taking long strides. 2 figures stood on the stairs, barring his way. A man and a woman, dressed in eccentric clothes. They stared down at him with hateful eyes. The doctor met their gaze with equal hostility. He knew their names. Knew. They were both beautiful, from a humanoid point of view, perfect. The doctor had never cared for perfection. "Get out of my way," he heard himself say. Gabriel and Tanith moved aside, and the doctor continued his journey. He didn't look back. He was afraid something terrible would happen if he tried. The doctor reached the top step, gasping for breath. There was a pain under his ribs too. There had been one for most of the climb. He'd had the determination to ignore it on the way up. Now, at the summit, he felt it burning beneath his heart, a burst of hot agony every couple of seconds. He let the pain cut him, waited for it to subside. After a minute, he realized it wasn't going away and pressed on regardless. A door flew open. He barged into the room beyond. It was an ugly cubbyhole, afflicted with a draught and a lingering smell of offal. In the centre of the room was a chair. Strapped securely into the chair was something that might once have been a woman. The doctor recognized her after a moment. The thing in the chair had once held him at gunpoint. Her head lay as far back as it could go, swaying slightly in the draught. A square of white cloth lay across her face, its shape moulding round her features. 2 jagged pink stains had swelled and smeared on the surface of the cloth, discolouring it. The head of the thing rolled to one side, falling to face the doctor. The cloth slipped away. Carefully, the doctor retrieved it and tied it into a blindfold across Page's face. He was trembling as he drew the knot tight. He remembered Ace and Bernice, and shuddered. The lips of the thing twitched, formed tortured words. "Who is that?" the thing said, each word an effort, a new pain. "Me," the doctor said blandly. The doctor, he clarified. Heard you were dead, Page continued. The report of my death was an exaggeration, he replied coldly. Page forced herself to smile. The doctor felt sick. He moved forward, tearing at the knots that tied Page's arms and legs to the chair. Despite her new freedom, she remained slumped in the chair. I can't see, she said, slightly puzzled. The doctor bit his lip. No, he said calmly. He looked down and found that he was holding one of Page's hands clasped between his own. Her hands were small and cold and delicate, and he felt more than one broken bone. He closed his palms and waited in silence. Quite how long he waited he was unable to remember. Perhaps an hour, perhaps longer. It seemed to slip by. Eventually he released the woman's hand, letting it flop. I have to go, he said. Don't, Page slurred. I have to find Ace and Benny, he insisted. Page jiggled her head sharply, as if it was too much of an effort to nod. The doctor strode away from what remained of Jane Page. He crossed to the door on the far side of the room. His fingers tightened round the handle reluctantly. On the one hand, there was the guilt of leaving Page to suffer. On the other, there was the fear of finding something worse on the far side of the door. He twisted the handle. It was another bare room. A shape lay huddled in the far corner, a human shape wrapped into an embryo ball, knees tucked under its chin. Between the shape and the doctor was a curtain of cobwebs. The doctor ploughed through them, letting them fall to dust in his effort to reach the shape in the corner. Spiders chattered on the edge of his hearing. He ignored them, driving himself through older webs in his effort to reach the shape. It was an ace shape. Her eyes opened to deliver a bleary stare. "Benny," she hissed. "I'm going to find Benny now," he said, trying to mask his worry and his relief. It didn't matter. Already she had slipped back into unconsciousness. The doctor straightened up. His eyes fell on another door. The next room, he was surprised to discover, was the room in which he had first met Winterdawn, the unlived-in, dusty place which Winterdawn's wife had once used. There was a warmer feeling to it now, as if a great deal of activity and emotion had been crammed into this tiny space during his absence. November evening light was filtering through the window. Professor Bernice Summerfield lay on what had once been Winterdawn's bed. Cautiously, the doctor approached the bed. He reached for Bernice's pulse and found nothing. He checked her breathing, but her chest was still, and dead air hung around her mouth and nostrils. Her eyes were dull orbs. Her body was cold, stiff. He looked upwards, bitter eyes turning to the ceiling. "How did she die?" he asked. His tone was even and banal. Silence answered him. Professor Bernice Summerfield lay dead on what had once been Winterdawn's bed. The doctor stood by the corpse and closed his eyes and waited.